Okay, good afternoon. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This afternoon, I'm really thrilled and honored to have with me as my guest Chip Conley, who's a keynote speaker, a multiple New York Times best-selling author. Chip, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Richard. I love the name of your podcast.
Thank you. So let me start by asking you, how do you describe yourself? I mean, if you're at a cocktail party and someone says to you, Chip, what do you do? What do you tell people?
I learned a few years ago that I am a social alchemist. There's an exercise you can do, which is to ask the same question over and over again. What mastery or gift do you have to offer? And someone asked me that. What mastery do you have to offer, Chip? And it's like, oh, I guess I am a connector of people. Thank you, Chip. And I then answered 5 times in a row. And by the fifth question, this is an exercise we do at our Modern Elder Academy, also MEA. By the fifth question, I realized that I was a social alchemist. I was a mixologist of people. And I like it.
Interesting. Well, you've written so many best-selling books, and we could spend an hour on each single one, but maybe start by telling me what is kind of the theme, or if there is one, that kind of ties all of them together.
Yeah, there's been 7 or 7. There's actually been 10, but I don't really count 3 of them. So there's 7 that are, sort of forward facing. I would say the key theme is that I am the crossing guard at the intersection of psychology and business. So I'm a dabbler and fascinated by psychology, and as a leader and as CEO of a couple different companies and helping to lead Airbnb and be the mentor of the CEO there. I've been always fascinated by how psychology is an undervalued skill in business, and so the idea of understanding psychology in business has been sort of core to the books I've written.
Interesting. And how did these psychological insights come to you, or did you just discover them, or did you study about them? How do they come to you?
It's funny, I only took 1 psychology class at Stanford when I went to university, and so it wasn't something that was in my education, but it was something that I think I really learned along the way. I started a boutique hotel company when I was 26. So I was CEO of a company at 26. That's sort of weird. And that grew into the 2nd largest boutique hotel company in the US, based in San Francisco. And long story short is, I think along the way, I realized that the most neglected fact in business is that we're all human. And trying to understand other humans became really interesting to me. And so I then did my own personal research on, a lot of different psychologists, from Abraham Maslow to Carl Rogers to Viktor Frankl to Erik Erikson. And many of the things I read about really influenced my perspective on what was great leadership. And so I ended up writing about those things.
Well, what made you decide to actually switch from, a lot of people know these insights, but they implement it just themselves by being a successful business person. It sounds like you obviously had a very successful career. Why not just implement that yourself and keep doing it? What made you decide to actually switch and, become a writer and
Well, I didn't switch. I've been doing both at the same time, which is sort of crazy. It's interesting, Richard. When I was when I was a teenager, I wanted to be a writer when I grew up. And I said that to my dad, and my dad's like, no way, that's not practical. You're not going to be able to pay the bills. And I didn't feel good about being a writer. So I basically walked away from any kind of writing. I did it to be functional, like in English class, but I didn't take any English classes in college, didn't take any creative writing classes. And so, but I thought, there's a part of me that felt like I want to be a writer when I grow up, but never thought it would happen. Then in my late 30s, when I was, at that point, I'd been running my boutique hotel company for a dozen years. We were one of the largest hoteliers in California at that point, and that was still in my late 30s. I gave a speech one time, and there was a literary agent in the audience. And she came up to me after the speech and she said, have you ever thought of being a writer? And I laughed and I said, well, I thought about it a lot, but I just felt like it was an impractical thing. And she says, you have a book inside yourself. And that's what led to me writing my first book, which is called The Rebel Rules, Daring to Be Yourself in Business. And Richard Branson wrote the foreword, and it became a successful book. And from that point forward, I was a writer.
So it turns out you really had a knack for it. You didn't, maybe you
Yeah.
didn't. It turns out you really have a knack
I,
for it, I guess.
I love writing. I write early in the morning. My writer wakes up before my editor. What I mean by that is that I wake up early in the morning and my thoughts are very raw, and I don't really edit myself, or
Hmm.
I sort of just let whatever's on my mind end up on paper, so to speak. And yeah, and I love writing. I have a daily blog. So anybody, if you have a daily blog, you better write like writing. And so I have a daily blog that you can find on chipconley.com or meawisdom.com.
Hmm.
Because it's called Wisdom Well, and it's like a little microdose of wisdom that I
Hmm.
send out to tens of thousands of people every morning.
So these ideas, these book ideas, they just come to you. I mean, is that,
Yeah,
and they
that's
just
it's like
slowly.
I get pregnant, and it's like, oh my God, I've gotten pregnant with an idea, and I need to birth this thing. Um, and it usually takes about 9 months to a year, like
Yeah.
pregnancy time, of thinking about it and then writing about it and then having it ready to go. This most recent book that just came out in January only took me a month and a half to write it, because for this book I was so ready to write it. I'd spent the last few years just really thinking about it. And when you have a daily blog, you create a lot of good material for a book. And so yeah, Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age, was the easiest book I've ever written.
Well, it's so funny because I was just going to ask you about that because I saw your TED Talk. And
Yes.
of course, being, I'm in my 50s now, so it was very relevant to me. But that book is a little bit of a departure, right? Because it's not just about psychology and business. It's more of a personal kind of thing, isn't it?
It's a personal thing, but I do talk about the psychology of aging, and this guy Eric Erickson and Brené Brown and a few other people who have got points of view around the psychology of aging and
Mm,
psychology of midlife.
mm,
But yeah, all my books are somewhat personal.
mm,
So it's a combination of psychology and business, but also with a little bit of Chip's story thrown in there.
mm.
Probably more story than my mom would like me to give, because it's sometimes very private stuff. But that makes it, makes my relationship with the reader that much more, intimate.
Now, in addition to being an author, you're also, tell me what other things you do consulting, you speak, you also mentor,
Well,
teach. What are the other things you do to fill your life?
so I was a boutique hotelier for 24 years and created Joie de Vivre, the second largest boutique hotel company in the US. We had 52 boutique hotels around California, each with its own name.
Wow.
Then I sold that and moved on to, my early 50s, not really sure what I was going to do next. And then I got a call from Brian Chesky, the young co-founder and CEO of Airbnb. And he said, Chip, how would you like to help us democratize hospitality? And this was over 11 years ago, when Airbnb was a tiny little tech startup.
Funny.
And I joined them. I joined them as the head of global hospitality and strategy and the in-house mentor to the three founders. And they called me the modern elder. I didn't like that too much because I thought they were making fun of my age, but I
Funny.
was twice the age of the average person there. And so I spent 7.5 years helping to guide that little tech startup into becoming
Wow.
the most valuable hospitality company in the world.
Yeah,
And
interesting.
that was fascinating. So I learned a lot about mentorship, learned a lot about intergenerational collaboration. Because they called me the modern elder, I decided to write a book called Wisdom at Work: The Making of a Modern Elder.
Hmm.
While I was writing that book down in Baja, down in Mexico, where I had a home on the beach, I had a Baja aha. I had an epiphany, and the epiphany was, why don't we have midlife wisdom schools? Why don't we have a place where people can come to
Hmm.
reimagine and repurpose themselves and
Hmm.
figure out what's next?
Hmm.
And so that's how MEA, the Modern Elder Academy, came about 6 years ago. And we've had over 4,000 people from 47 countries
Wow.
come to our first campus, which is in Mexico, on the beach. And then our second campus opens in Santa Fe, New Mexico, in the US, in the spring. And yeah, and
Wow.
I do a lot of different things, but the primary thing I do today is I'm the founder and CEO of MEA, the
Yeah,
world's
yeah.
first midlife wisdom school.
Interesting. How do you compare teaching that you do at the school versus writing? I mean, do you love one more than the other? Do you like both? What's the
It's interesting.
interconnectivity between those two?
There's three different components. There's writing, there's speaking, giving speeches like the TED conference,
Yeah.
and then there's teaching or facilitating.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I were to, first of all, the good news is I like all three. So
Yeah.
that's a good thing.
Yeah.
If I had to sort of look at my capabilities and what is it that I'm world class at, I would say that if I were to rank those three, I am probably world class at facilitating and teaching in the format of what we do at MEA. I'm really good at being able to bring together. That's the social alchemy, bringing together a group of people, usually about 24 people in a week-long workshop, and creating magic. I would say the second, if I had to choose between writing and speaking as second and third, I would say that I'm probably a writer is my second place and speaker third place. I do give tons of speeches, and I'm, to be on the TED stage 3 times means that I obviously do that pretty well.
Yeah.
But I think the writing is really second place. That feels right to me, and the speaking's third place.
Now, I was gonna say I've interviewed a lot of writers on my show, and one of the things I always, I know writers when they write books, they think, oh, it looks easy, but they always say how much hard work writing a book is. Is that your experience, or do you just really? I mean, it sounds like for you, it's more just an enjoyable process. What would you say?
I love it. So I'm ready to write another book, and I just finished one. So I mean, I enjoy writing. I think that what are the challenges with writing? What could a person? So one challenge could be you're an extrovert and you don't enjoy introversion time.
Yeah, right.
I'm an ambivert. I'm both an extrovert and introvert, so I don't mind that time by myself.
Yeah.
Another thing that could be hard is you're not a very good writer, and so there's sometimes people who have a great idea but they're not a good writer, and they don't know how to create structure, and that kind of person often needs a ghostwriter or a co-author. That's not me. I like writing. Sometimes you don't have enough time in your life to write. I tend to go to bed very early and I wake up very early. So for me, writing between like 4:30 and 7:30 in the morning is really easy. And so getting 3 hours of uninterrupted writing time a day, you can write a book pretty quickly that way.
Now, how do you oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, how do you compare your life as, running the hospitality business versus now running MEA and writing? I mean, are they very different, or, do you feel like they're almost like two careers in a way, or do you feel like they're really kind of the same, just different subject matter?
I think that the 3 stages of my career, first being that, leader, CEO of a boutique hotel company, I grew a company up to 3,500 people from nothing. And so I had to be really focused on leadership and focused on raising money. And it was classic entrepreneur. So I was really an entrepreneur in that case. And then I went into Airbnb, and I was no longer the CEO. I was no longer the sage on the stage. I was the guide on the side. And I had to right size my ego to understand, what does it mean to be a mentor? And maybe an exceptional mentor, which I really wanted to be for the founders. And that was beautiful. I really enjoyed that. And then, now I feel like this is the coup de grace. This is the thing that I've wanted to do my whole life, which is to create a school that is dedicated to helping people learn how to live their best life and offer something to the world. I mean, I believe that, the purpose of our life is to discover our gift. And the work of life is to develop it. And then the meaning of life is to give it away. And that's a quote from David Viscott that I think is so right on.
Well, it sounds like it's the perfect thing to be doing now. Do you have any other goals that you want to do with MEA? Make it bigger, more global? Or, I mean, I assume you're going to write more books, but what else is in the future for Chip Conley?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we have a second campus here in Santa Fe, and then we have another 12-acre campus right in the town of Santa Fe, in Museum Hill, one of the most beautiful parts of Santa Fe. It's a former Catholic retreat center and seminary. So we'll have another modern elder academy there. We also do regenerative residential communities. So instead of retirement communities, because the average age of people who come to MEA is 54. So it's sort of, classic midlife.
Yeah.
We have created these communities where people live by the principles of regeneration and not retirement. And so how do you constantly revitalize yourself and the community? So those are all the things I'm doing. I would love to someday take over some liberal arts college that's closing in the United States, and there will be a lot of them in the next 10 years,
Yeah.
and turn it into a midlife gap year academy where people come for a year to just sort of refuel themselves. So yeah, but I who knows what's next.
But with all these ideas, it sounds like you'll probably never stop writing, because that's something you just love doing, and and you seem to always come up with interesting ideas.
I will continue to write. And the fact that I have a daily blog means that I have an obligation to write. But I do love it. And to actually help put into words something that someone has felt, but they've never been able to say it. That there's a gift in that.
Yeah. Well, Chip, this has been a wonderful conversation. It was such a pleasure meeting. I've heard all about you from Gary Bowles and other people, but it was just so wonderful chatting with you in person.
Well, thank you, Richard. Thanks for the work you do. Thanks for getting the word out about how to show up in this life as the person you're supposed to be.
That's so cool. This is Richard Hsu and Chip Conley. Thanks.